Hey everyone, thanks for checking out today's Multiphonic-a-Day video. My name is Ben, I'm a bassoonist based in Chicago, and I've been making and posting one of these videos every day that I'm in self-isolation during the COVID-19 pandemic. Today is Saturday, April 4th, 2020. This is 3 weeks, 21 days of self-isolation for me, and today is episode 19 of Multiphonic-a-Day. I'm really excited today to be sharing a conversation I had earlier in the day with composer and bassoonist Timothy McCormack. He and I talked about his massive and extraordinary solo bassoon piece, Body Matter, which is for amplified bassoon played with a plastic reed and features some really incredible multiphonics. So Tim and I talk a little bit about his general approach to the bassoon and to writing for multiphonics for this piece, and then he also shares 3 multiphonics from the opening of the piece. And unfortunately, due to the compression on Zoom, those don't come through quite as noisily or with the full spectrum as maybe they deserve to be heard. And so I'm just going to play, before we get to the interview, those 3 multiphonics so you can hear them on the mics here and get the full taste of them. And then Tim will explain a little bit more about them in the interview itself. So as always, leave me your thoughts, your comments, and thanks for watching. I hope you enjoy the interview. These are the 3 first multiphonics of Body Matter. Cool. Okay, so I'm here with Tim McCormack, composer, and Tim is going to show us some multiphonics from his behemoth bassoon piece, Body Matter. First, can you just tell us like a little bit about yourself as a composer? Why are you holding a bassoon? What's the story of this piece?
Right, yeah. Well, thanks for having me. Um, yeah, my name is Tim McCormack. I'm a composer, but I'm also a bassoonist. The bassoon, when I was a kid, I learned a bunch of instruments. Like I started on percussion, and then I learned piano and flute and guitar and blah blah blah. And the bassoon was like the last instrument that I picked up. I think I only started learning it in like, I don't know, like sophomore year of high school or something.
Mm-hmm.
But somehow that became my main instrument.
Yeah.
Like I kind of took off on it.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why I ended up on bassoon is because my high school music teacher, who's now my stepfather, um, he knew that I wanted to that I wanted to get into a music conservatory
Mm-hmm.
and do composition. And but he was like, your 2 main instruments are piano and flute, and you got to be like really really good at those to
Right.
get into conservatory, so we
Right.
need to get you on an instrument that like is less competitive basically. And it initially was the oboe, but the embouchure was just too difficult for me.
I hear you.
And
Yeah.
so he was like, well, you could do bassoon, it's even fewer people play that. So
Yeah.
that's how it all started. And then uh, the bassoon, I only have this one solo piece for the bassoon, and since I wrote Body Matter, that's the name of this bassoon solo. Since I wrote it, I now have one ensemble piece that has bassoon in it. Um,
And that's sediment,
but
right?
yeah, so that's called Sediment, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so I didn't really write for my instrument for most of my time, like learning composition and stuff. But I'm kind of more recently realized how much it's affected me as a composer, like my
Hmm.
relationship with the bassoon. Because whether I'm writing for wind instruments or string instruments or like whatever I'm writing for, I always think um, I like access compositional ideas through thinking about the instrument's mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
And like my notation has developed to like really reveal or show what the performer needs to do, like on the mechanism of the instrument.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that makes perfect sense, because like the bassoon is one of the most insane mechanisms of any wind instrument. Like your left thumb has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 keys that it's
Right.
manipulating, you know?
Right. Yeah.
So I think being a bassoonist kind of made me, like, as a bassoonist, you have to like really confront this super complex mechanism, not just the keys, but also like your relationship between your embouchure and the reed.
Right.
And so I think that's why actually I, as a composer, think about all instruments through their mechanism. And as far as the solo piece goes, like I said, it's called Body Matter, and I knew at a certain point, I don't know, I always avoided writing for my instrument, like I said, because I had such a specific relationship with the bassoon. I wanted to, I was kind of like waiting for my compositional like voice to be basically like strong enough to write for the bassoon. You know?
Yeah.
Like I wanted to honor the bassoon. I didn't want to write a bad piece for the bassoon until I So I was kind of like waiting on it, and then around the time that I was just privately feeling like, yeah, I think I could write. I think I could finally write a bassoon solo. I was contacted by Chris Watford, who at the time was living in Boston, and we had met, but we weren't like close friends or anything. We became close friends through this piece.
Yeah, of course.
And yeah, so he contacted me and he just asked if I would be if I would be interested. And I'm not even sure if he knew that I was a bassoon. Oh no, yeah, I had told him, because I contacted him because he put a really good recording of him doing one of the Poulenc solos.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, what? There's a bassoonist in the city that I live in who's doing these Poulenc solos, which, you know, this was a couple years, like many years ago, 6 maybe. So it wasn't like quite as common for people to do Poulenc solos. Anyway. But yeah, so it just sort of happened, and like Chris was a really, really awesome collaborator. He was really kind of respectful or whatever of like the fact that I am a bassoonist, and so I already have this relationship with this instrument, but I'm writing a piece for him. And he was like super open for all of the crazy stuff that happens in the piece. Even the fact that I asked him, can this piece be specifically for a plastic reed? And I was totally expecting blowback, you know, because double reed players love their reeds.
Right. Yeah.
But he was actually like, oh my God, that would be amazing. Like, I'm so done with cane reeds. I've been waiting for an excuse to explore plastic reeds. So it actually kind of like was something that he was specifically really into. And the piece just kind of slowly writing this was like a super important piece for me, obviously. And yeah, I don't know, I'm really happy with it. And like years later, I wrote it in 2015. So 5 years later, oh my God.
Yeah.
It's still a piece that I'm like super, super proud of.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I'll definitely post a link to one of Chris's performances of this piece below the video. And
nice.
I highly encourage everyone to check it out. It's really, I mean, it's incredible in so many ways, like just, you know, like the sheer physical feat of playing this piece, like in terms of the circular breathing the whole time, the precision with which he executes these really delicate changes in multiphonics. Like, you know, like I've followed along with the score on the recording on this piece several times, and it's just like, it's pretty remarkable. Like what just
there's a lot that goes into this piece, or a lot that you have to sort of confront or whatever as a performer of this piece. And like most of it is multiphonics, and the multiphonics themselves are super specific and potentially finicky, etc. but there's also like, it's not just multiphonics. There's also like this lengthy passage with like incredibly high harmonics and like whistle tone harmonics, and like that. Those two things, as far as like a reed is concerned, aren't super compatible, but he makes it work.
It's really crazy. And so maybe could you just demonstrate a couple of these the multiphonics from the opening that you want to show, and then maybe we can use that as a discussion about like the way that you were thinking about those sounds within the piece.
Sure, yeah. So this is my high school reed. This is this old reed, which is like, this reed is older than some of my students.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That's scary. That's really scary.
Yeah. But it's still kicking. Okay, so yeah, I'm just gonna play basically the opening of the piece, which is 3 multiphonics in a row, and hopefully I'll be able to nail them on the first shot. That was pretty good. There's a lot of grime in that take.
Yeah, I love that. So these are like 3 sonically pretty different multiphonics, and yet in terms of the notation, you're only changing 1 or 2 fingers at a time.
Yeah, and that's fairly indicative of like my thought process when I talk about composing through the mechanism. I am particularly, and this piece is probably the best example of this, but at least on wind instruments, but like it's translated to string instruments in different ways as well. I'm interested in like finding sounds that feel either like really different from one another, or can be transformed from one to another, but like through really minimal or idiomatic means for the performer. So this, I like these. This is the opening of the piece, and I like it a lot because it's probably like just like the cleanest example of this. The multiphonic fingerings themselves are pretty complicated, but to go from one to the other, from the first fingering, the second fingering is just adding 1 finger back down, and then the third is releasing that again and adding a different fingering. So the second and third multiphonics in the piece are actually just 1 finger away from the original, like the first multiphonics fingering. But as you said, like the actual like harmonic content, and not just harmonic, but like the textures of these multiphonics are all really, really different.
Yeah, and that's one thing throughout this that I think is like, that's one of my favorite aspects of the piece in listening to it, and also in my so far very elementary attempts to play it, is that there are these like very simple actions that are taken that sometimes my understanding of what's going to happen matches up very directly with what I'm doing physically, and then sometimes it's totally surprising to me. And sometimes there are also like really extreme changes in embouchure placement, I find, in between some of these. And so like within the score, you've notated that pretty explicitly in terms of where the embouchure is on the reed, and also embouchure pressure and air pressure. Can you talk a little bit about like your thinking about those parameters as part of the execution of this piece?
Yeah, I mean, they're essential, because a lot of these, I mean, this piece is, like I said, I wrote it 5 years ago, and I feel like where I was in my work was in the middle of sort of a transition regarding these types of physical actions upon the instrument. The pieces that come before this piece, maybe not all of them, but like in general, take a more sort of like frenetic, almost like aggressive approach to the idea of physicality and how that affects sounds, meaning that like things like embouchure changes and air pressure changes in previous pieces were more to like disrupt whatever sonic event was happening, and that kind of creates a new sonic event. But I did think of it very much as like a disruption or like a shattering of the sound. But with this piece, like that's not invited into this piece at all. Like the type of physicality that this piece and pretty much like everything that I wrote after the piece requires is an incredibly like focused physicality. All of these types of changes like embouchure pressure, air pressure, placement on the reed are all at service to very specific sounds. And yeah, so there's I mean, I feel like the multiphonic like universe of this piece in general, all of the multiphonics I found myself like while I was writing the piece. When I sat down to write the piece, I assumed that I would basically write what I might improvise, like we all kind of have our collection of multiphonics that we use or that we found, and we all have I mean, I was doing a lot of improvisation at the time or like before that, and I had a sort of like relationship with this instrument as far as like as an improviser, and I kind of assumed that the piece that I would write would be basically a notated improvisation or like similar to that. But as soon as I actually sat down and like put my composer brain on or whatever, that really changed. And so like all of these multiphonics were things that I found were like not things that I had already known. Like everything were things that I was like finding in response to the piece. And I kind of stumbled upon, and I'm sure like other people know, like it's not like I invented these multiphonics, but I did, find them on my own instrument. And I stumbled upon this world of multiphonics that I had personally never encountered before on this instrument, which I call them like rusty radiator multiphonics.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this maybe doesn't apply to like every single multiphonic in the piece, but in general, the multiphonic language or texture of this piece is like, I feel like when we think multiphonics, we think like very dense, very saturated, very wet, very like these big open sounds. And a lot of the most of the multiphonics in this piece, and sort of the bedrock of the sound world for this piece, is actually kind of the opposite. Like these really dry multiphonics that have a sort of like thinness or a graininess, and yeah, like kind of rusty radiator, in like a little department. Yeah. And so that's where most of them sit, and most of that like requires like a regular placement on the reed and stuff. But then, as you asked me about like 10 minutes ago, there are these multiphonics that exist in like real extremes of things like embouchure and air pressure. So some of them require you to be like literally at the tip of the reed with like the widest embouchure, and I guess by wide I mean like your lips are barely putting any pressure on the reed. But then there's some of my favorite, and I don't even know if this is necessarily a multiphonic. It's just like a crazy sound. But there are other, we'll call them multiphonics, in the piece that require you to do the exact opposite. Like literally the entire reed has to be in your mouth.
Right.
And at that point, like embouchure pressure doesn't come into it because you're literally touching the vocal.
Yeah, it's like a bagpipe reed kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and all of those things were things that I had not, were things that I had discovered as I was writing this. These weren't like tricks that I had up my bassoonist sleeve already. So I guess my point is I'm not trying to say like, oh, I discovered all these cool things.
Right.
But I was a bassoonist since high school, and I only wrote this piece like 5 years ago. But approaching the bassoon in this way, like I said, like my composition hat on, it actually I actually like rediscovered this instrument that I had been playing for most of my life, which was really, really cool.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's really interesting to hear from that perspective too, because I feel like as a performer, I have a similar thing in that, there are multiphonics that I play that are kind of my default things that I've found through improvisation and experimentation and all of that. But then there are also, like, when I learn like some of those Poulenc pieces, like I discover these things that never would have occurred to me otherwise.
Right.
And it's like, I'm not, that's not like that's not my composer hat, but that's me like venturing into a different kind of relationship with those sounds than just like my own thing. And so it's really interesting to hear you say that this piece, and thinking about it, like thinking about these sounds within the framework of this piece, led you to discover ones that you wouldn't have otherwise.
Yeah, totally different. I mean, not just like different multiphonics, but it also, for me personally, it like revealed a sound world that existed in the bassoon that I had never tapped before, Like I said, just like this dry, but like layered, I think I described the sound world to Chris like when I had first finished the piece and we were working on it, like as like the sound is like encrusted with like dry soil and mud or something, like this very earthen quality.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, and that's totally a totally different like quality of sound and like means of expression than I had ever had with the bassoon before that. Like I said, I always approached the bassoon like in improvisation, like super gesturally and like much richer, wetter multiphonics. But now for me, the bassoon is this like dry, rusty radiator instrument. Like it's completely reframed the instrument for me.
Yeah, that's amazing. I really hope that those intricacies come across in this Zoom audio. I don't know how good the recording feature is.
I don't know.
But in any case, I'll definitely post the recording of Chris playing below too, so that people can hear the whole piece, but then also those ones in context, because it's just really like it really is this rattly quality to it that is really, that I think is also exclusive to playing it with one of these plastic reeds. That trying to play some of these, it's like they sound like it sounds more like a bassoon to me, like kind of what I imagine a bassoon to be, and this is an entirely new instrument. And
some of these multiphonics, like I guess I'm just imagining this because it's probably been like 20 years since I've even touched a cane reed. But but I would imagine that with a cane reed, the cane might like literally kind of like absorb a lot of the resistance and reverberation. Like some of these multiphonics, the way that they just vibrate on the reed, I can, like, as a bassoonist playing it, you literally feel that, I say this sometimes with a lot of my pieces, that I feel like the best seat in the house is the performer's seat. And I was thinking about that. I never thought of that in regards to this piece, but earlier today when I was just like playing through some of it in preparation for this, I had that feeling very strongly, just like where the sound leaks out, and especially just like the physical response that you get from the reed itself.
Yeah.
Like the bassoonist is sort of in the best seat in the house for listening to this piece.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean, and it's like with some of these Poulenc pieces, especially his piece Blaues Fragment, which I learned recently. I think that's the most recent one because it was written after the Lenio Edris
Yeah,
series.
it's not in the Lenio. Yeah.
Right, and it's like
yeah.
I get like really emotional playing it. It's weird for me because it's like there's the like feedback is so clear in terms of like, you know, the way that I'm manipulating my air and my embouchure, and then the way that I like physically feel the reed responding in terms of its vibration, and then the way I feel the resistance change, because there's so many places in those pieces where it's like you're gradually cycling through all of these different variations on one multiphonic, and then it finally like triggers a shift, and it's just like this really amazing feeling as like having that resistance change that like I don't really experience that in the same way, that relationship with the bassoon in the same way, like playing other kinds of music.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't looked at the Bologna, like I have some of the scores, but I haven't looked at them so closely, like with my instrument. So I don't know like the type of multiphonics that he's using, like how they feel and stuff. But I would imagine, I mean, but I know the pieces or some of them.
Right.
And I imagine it's sort of similar to Body Matter in that like they're well, I don't know. I don't know Bologna's these. I'll just speak about my own piece.
Right.
But like one of the things that I really like about the types of multiphonics and like you said, like I notate very specifically things like the air pressure and the position on the reed and the embouchure pressure and stuff. But this like quality of like feedback that you get from the instrument and from the reed with these particular sounds and techniques, and the capacity to like search for the sound. Like I said earlier, a lot of these multiphonics, there's actually multiple different multiphonics within a single fingering, and it all depends on your body, you know, to like kind of like shuffle between them, your air pressure, your embouchure pressure, like all these things potentially, depending on the fingering, yield totally different multiphonics. And so like one of the things I really like about the piece is at least like playing it is with some of these multiphonics, like you're seeking them out, and all the things that you're creating sound cool, but then you find the one that is actually written, and like you can feel it like locks in, and it's like, oh, those were cool, but like this is the one. you know?
Well, I mean, even with the first, like maybe we can even look at just the first multiphonic, like when I was first trying to play that one, there were like at least 2 or 3 different possible. Okay, let me get this fingering right. Oh, I'm doing it wrong. Okay, we'll fix this in post. Right.
Yeah, like a little bit more like rolling quality, you know, like this dry rolling around that E. Yeah.
It's so, but it's such a complex sound. I mean, you notate the E as kind of the most prominent pitch center, but there's so much like distortion and noise, and like really noise in there, I think. You know,
rusty radiator.
Yeah, exactly. So well, this is great. Thank you for showing those, and maybe you and I can chat a little bit more about notation in terms of some other stuff, but in terms of the Multiphonic-a-Day, anything else that you want to say about this piece, or your thoughts about multiphonics on the bassoon in general?
I don't know. I think I maybe said everything that I want to say. I think that your Multiphonic-a-Day project is very cool, and I like how like personalized it's becoming, you know?
Yeah.
Like highlighting specific worlds of multiphonic that this person used and that person used. Because that's, I think, well, I guess I will say something. The world of the bassoon needs to be demystified. I think a lot of composers are scared of the instrument because a lot of people just don't. It's not as visible, you know. Like people don't have as many experiences even hearing the bassoon, let alone like working with a bassoonist or
Right.
whatever. So it's sort of I get the sense that composers are are kind of afraid of it because they it's sort of like a puzzle or something. So that's like the first step that a composer who wants to write for the bassoon needs to get over. But then once they get over that, it's like this like really dense wilderness that they then have to like take a machete to navigate because there's just so much. One of my first composition teachers, Louis Nielsen, who you know,
of course,
he called the bassoon the instrument of the 21st century,
yeah.
which I really, love.
I've heard him say that before too. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and so one thing that I hope that like composers are taking away from your Multiphonic-a-Day project is that like at least on the bassoon, but probably for all the other, like all other wind instruments, it's not just like multiphonics. Like bassoon can do multiphonics. There's like all these different categories and like categories of types of sound and categories of like types of fingerings that produce, there's like this entire world of multiphonics that that the bassoon can do. And if you want this type of multiphonic, there's like an entire world of that. If you want that type of multiphonic, there's an entire world of that. But you kind of have to search for them,
Yeah. Well, and there's so many possibilities, and like your piece reveals like so many of these other pieces that I've talked about, that it's like, if you use a multiphonic as a starting point and then manipulate it in all these different ways, it's like each one of them contains a whole world of possibilities.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Well, thank you for agreeing to be on the show today. And thanks for showing some of your piece, and thank you for writing such a monumental work and like exploring multiphonics in this way. I think it's, I think this piece is unique in its approach to the bassoon, and I think that it opens up a lot of possibilities that had never really occurred to me in terms of both like discovering certain sounds and then pushing them further. And, and I think that's really, I think that's an amazing accomplishment of this piece. So
cool. Well, thanks so much. That really means a lot. That's sort of, that's like why I also am excited about this piece of mine. And thanks for having me. This was I'll always take any excuse I can find to like talk at length about my work in the bassoon. Thanks so much.